was sent forth from the power, and I have come to those who reflect upon me, and I have been found among those who seek after me. Look upon me, you who reflect upon me, and you hearers, hear me. You who have been searching for me, take me to yourselves and do not banish me from your sight. And do not let your voice hate me, nor your hearing. Do not be ignorant of me anywhere or any time. Be on your guard. Do not be ignorant of me, for I am the first and the last. I am the honored one and the scorned one. I am the whore and the holy one. I am the wife and the virgin. I am the mother and the daughter. I am the members of my mother. I am the barren one, and many are her sons. I am she whose wedding is great, and I have not taken a husband. I am the midwife, and she who does not bear. I am the solace of my labor pains. I am the bride and the bridegroom, and it is my husband who begot me. I am the mother of my father and the sister of my husband, and he is my offspring. This text, a Gnostic text from Nag Hammadi, helps us to recognize our divinity. Now, how does it accomplish that? I will attempt to answer that question by drawing on the work of Carl Jung and Jean Gebser. We will go through these 3 points. So first we'll look at this section. This is just a small portion of that text. We'll look at it through the lenses of Jung and the individuation process that he describes, which consists of 3 sets of conjunctions or integrations. And we'll also look at it through Gebser's notion of transparency or diaphaneity. Aaron translates it as diaphany. That's part 1. Then part 2 will relate these 2 perspectives to the ways that polarity, complementarity, and unity are integrated by the curious topological structures known as the Möbius strip and the Klein bottle. And then I'll use those topological structures as foundations for thinking about a new form of language to better express experiences of integral consciousness, such as the one that I just represented. So here we go. We'll start with ordinary language, which takes us to a non-ordinary state of consciousness, which then allows us to imagine new forms of language. So I wanted you to, I wanted you to hear that part of Thunder Perfect Mind performed, embodied as it likely was when it was written or recorded down. It was probably passed on orally. Reading it silently does not have that same powerful effect as declaring it about oneself. So embracing the paradoxes is how it transforms our consciousness. So knowing about Jung's conjunctions will not get you through them. But if you don't know about them, it's unlikely you'll just sort of stumble through them in everyday life. They require not just study, but conscientious psychic work on oneself. And this work consists of navigating these levels of integration. So the unio mentalis involves integrating conceptual opposites intrapsychically, holding them in mind, In other words, getting that the opposites are not opposed, and that they function rather as an independent co-arising. Now, there are different types of, let's just say, opposites in a very basic sense. The simple, most basic ones are at the opposite ends of a continuum, such as light and dark, hot and cold. Another type are those that continually follow one another, such as summer and winter, night and day. Some opposites contain the seed of the other and would be meaningless without the other, such as master and slave. Then at a more complex level, some become the other in a process called enantiodromia, which is when you push one pole of a polarity like to its extreme and it flips into its opposite. Examples include yin and yang, pleasure and pain. Some polarities complement each other, masculine and feminine, nature and nurture, self and other. The key aha moment in the unio mentalis is when you realize, oh, they're not separate, we just have separate words for them. So with the conjunctio oppositorum, the next one, we have the cross. So the unio mentalis gives us the opposites, like we're holding, like in the garden, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, if you remember that statue. After you have those sorts of aha moments and realizations that the opposites are not separate, then it's necessary to embody them and to bring in spirit and body. This conjunction involves, for example, strengthening the aspects of masculinity or femininity in oneself that one lacks. It involves integrating the dark parts of yourself with the light parts. It involves recollecting one's projections, integrating one's shadow. When you do that, synchronicities start to abound in your life, leading to the third conjunction. Okay, there we go. Jung describes the unus mundus as the unity of all archetypes, as well as the multiplicity of the phenomenal world. So this conjunctio integrates all that has become conscious in the prior two conjunctions with all that is yet unconscious, all that is actual with what is potential. To facilitate this conjunction, ask yourself, how can I create myself as a possibility and then live into that possibility ongoingly? This gets us into the imaginal realm, the space from which we create. So this passage, part of what I spoke earlier, shows the conjoining of opposite concepts at the beginning of the Thunder Perfect Mind. First, it is necessary to understand that you can be something and its opposite. In one circumstance, you are generous, for example, but change the circumstances and you could very well be greedy or stingy. This understanding has to come first before you actually embody both. But when you have integrated this conjunction, you realize the wisdom of one of my favorite American philosophers, Ralph Waldo Emerson, when he describes a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. You free yourself from foolish consistency.
It's a great quote.
Okay, so Gebser no, let me back up. It is next necessary to transition from doing to being. That is, living these conjunctions. So one can understand in principle the making of music, for example, that you can't play the guitar unless you do it and practice it, embody it. For the next step toward wholeness and integration, in Thunder, we have to use our imagination to conceive of Gebser's notion of transparency, which he defines as the form of manifestation of the spiritual. Note, form of manifestation. Using a spatial model as a metaphor here, we can see how an opaque cube only allows us to see the nearest faces, while a transparent cube enables us to see its whole structure. Now, in your mind's eye, you can conceive of the whole structure in a gestalt, even if you can't see the details of the faces in the back. Now imagine applying the same idea, this metaphor, to time, so that you can see through past, present, future simultaneously. So just as we can in our mind's eye look through the surfaces of objects, we can look through the surfaces of events, seeing their connectivity to all other events. What is the importance of doing this, you might ask? Gebser tells us our concern is with a new reality, a reality functioning and effectual integrally, in which intensity and action, the effective and the effect, coexist. One where origin, by virtue of presentiation, blossoms forth anew, and one in which present is all-encompassing and entire. Integral reality is the world's transparency, a perceiving of the world as truth, a mutual perceiving and imparting of truth of the world and of man, and of all that transluces both. So here's how, here is how the Thunder embodies this notion of transparency through time and space. By using kinship relations, the speaker speaks from the perspective of being all of it, as just described by Gebser, and of being the unus mundus described by Jung. So if you're allness, imagine yourself as allness, speaking about yourself as allness, you would not be limited to any one incarnation, and you would be both subject and object. Allness includes all beings that ever existed. Okay, but that's a rather impersonal, abstract, hard to imagine way of putting it. So imagine that the speaker in Thunder concresses, makes concrete the idea of all beings atemporally by claiming that he is her own grandmother, sister-in-law, and both child and mother of her husband. This text is like a koan. Its illogicality, in the traditional sense, slaps you into a different consciousness state. This, in my humble opinion, is an extraordinary use of ordinary language to convey a highly mystical idea. So Thunder Perfect Mind helps us see ourselves as not just unions of opposites, although we did have to go through that stage, those stages, to get to all of it, to get to unus mundus. Then achieving this perspective, then enables one to see that one can embody one's own unique individual perspective and imagine a vaster perspective approximating all of it. As Osiris was dismembered and then remembered this part of the thunder, I am the members of my mother, reminds us that we are all members of our great mother. Not parts, but members. And membership has responsibilities to the whole. Okay, so part 2, we need to switch gears and think about some paradoxical topological forms that embody these unions of opposites. So here we have the Möbius strip. Locally, if you are an ant walking on this Möbius strip, it looks like a normal, flat, two-sided piece of paper. Okay, but if you are holding it, seeing its wholeness, you can realize its paradoxical nature, namely that it seems to have two sides, but really only has one. If you trace your finger, on one side, you end up being on both sides. The Möbius strip gives us a way to imagine the union of opposites, where they don't get synthesized into a third thing that is neither one nor the other. Rather, they maintain their uniqueness while also being united. The one side of the Möbius doesn't negate the other. Where there is one side, there is also the other. Yet, from a more complete perspective, it is clear that there is ultimately only one side that serves as both sides. Niels Bohr said something that reflects this. He said, "The opposite of a fact is a falsehood, but the opposite of one profound truth may very well be another profound truth." It is easy to see the whore as the shadow of the Holy One, but we must also see the Holy One as the shadow of the whore. To Jesus, Mary Magdalene was holy. To Constantine and his ilk, she was a whore. We all have the capacity to be both. Now, the Klein bottle is a higher dimensional union of two Möbius strips. So this is a two-dimensional image of a three-dimensional object that requires 4 dimensions for its existence. It is non-orientable, as you saw it spinning. It doesn't have a top and a bottom. It unites inside and outside as a continuum. And I like to use it to represent flowing, dynamism, process, subject objectivity. So recall too what we said about transparency. If you cannot see through the Klein bottle, you might think it's kind of a funny shaped mug, but seeing through allows you to see the paradox, so that now it makes sense. Seeing the global perspective, it is possible to see the form of the whole. I can't necessarily see the whole with my physical eyes, but I can conceive its form, as Gebser suggested. So the Möbius strip and the Klein bottle bring us to questions about representing integration, particularly involving language and consciousness. Jung and Gebser show us ways to integrate our consciousness. Thunder points to ways to use language paradoxically to foster such integrations. Interesting that we had some thunder this morning.
Yes.
But the type of paradoxical language in the thunder simply perplexes most people, including me, for many years. I draw inspiration from the Möbius strip and the Klein bottle, and more importantly, the kinds of ideas about paradoxical wholeness that they convey, as a way to bridge the language gap. So instead of keeping concepts, like opposites or polarities, separate, why don't we integrate them in a Möbial or Kleinian manner?
Yeah, amen.
This type of relationship which I describe as distinct but not separate from, can be captured by this glyph, which I pronounce Mobi, after Möbius strip. First, a caveat. This glyph is not part of a complete language system. These are just like little ideas to get us to become hungry, to develop more. Okay, so Mobi is a kind of preposition in that it conveys a type of relationship that assumes radical interconnectedness, while also asserting that we can still make distinctions between this bit and some other bit. Now consider the difference between these two statements. We live on Earth. We are Mobi Earth, distinct but not separate from. They put us into a very different ethical relationship with each other and with all else. Why is this important? I'm not going to read these two quotes, but they basically say things that we all know, that we've been, by thinking ourselves separate, we've been destroying ourselves and our environment. Okay, so in the title of this presentation, I promised you a paradoxical language for our future selves. Thunder, perfect mind, brilliantly uses ordinary language in a paradoxical way. It might be appropriate for an experience of gnosis, as when it was written. And then the Möbius strips and Klein bottles are symbols in themselves, but they won't do simply as symbols. So perhaps glyphs will engage our right brain pattern-seeking cognitive capacity. Okay? So Jung said that paradox is a characteristic of all transcendental situations because it alone gives adequate expression to their indescribable nature. So here are a few ideas that I have had to get us to start thinking about ways to express different types of diversity within unity, ways to convey our integrations. So this one is called Mu Ishiwa, and it means one side that serves as both sides. So just as the speaker of thunder proclaims to be holy and a whore, Mu Ishiwa conveys the interdependence of those types of polarities. To truly know that you are both master and slave first allows you to see that if you are in the role of master, that role enslaves you in a particular way. And only by seeing that you are both can you be free to be you and thus to be neither. This is what transparency offers, to see the wholeness in a gestalt of simultaneity. And this is what these glyphs are trying to convey. So this one, called Fuangu, is the masculine or yang partner to the previous one. It means the deeper you get, the less it looks like itself, and the more it looks like its opposite. So this idea brings in action, activity, a process of investigating deeply, which is another way of saying, looking through transparently. When we consider the conjunctio oppositorum with regard to both embodying matter and energy, you might realize that you are energy beings have a material existence, as the saying goes. Shamans know this, they shapeshift. More people seem to be developing these capacities. So what kind of language will be needed when most of us have these kinds of capacities? This one is called akrana, and it means the union of the material and the divine. It is both masculine and feminine before their differentiation. That is, when both are still potential. It conveys the unus mundus. It also resembles the zygote at the 8-cell stage. Here, it only looks like there's 6, but they're smushed on a microscope slide. When one has fully conjoined one's material being with the sacred, or consciousness with the unconscious, what becomes possible? We must remember ourselves as Möbi, as distinct but not separate, as embodying all of it through space and time. So here are all the stages kind of put together. We start in three-dimensional reality, seeing the surface of things. We begin to see that the poles of certain opposites are united, interconnected. And we begin to see through to the core of our experiences in space-time, to understand the paradoxical both-andness of experience. And as we begin to see through all of it, to see the form of the unus mundus, actual and potential, as William Blake put it, to see the world in a grain of sand, and heaven in a wildflower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. So this last glyph, which I call polarities, shows the process of one becoming many and many becoming one, congealing to a point of emptiness, and then the point expanding into multiplicity over and over. This glyph could be indicating, for example, that an individual is a vessel for soul, and soul is a vessel for individuals. We also have to bring such integral insight into our everyday lives and be able to communicate from this sense of wholeness. Then we need to apply these ideas in novel forms of language to all of the social structures that we have created in and by language. And by that I mean our government and our laws, the economy, commerce, education, and even entertainment. This will involve iterative processes. And this glyph reminds us about that iteration. Okay, so before we can integrate glyphs, such as the ones I just showed, which are pretty far out there, maybe we can first start with some simple yin-yang types of unio mentalis, the joining of opposites. And then we can see how those joined opposites also function together. So this triple glyph shows how multiple polarities interact. It suggests, for example, that when we consider rights, or the popular word these days in the US is freedom, that it also goes with responsibility, and that we must also consider how they affect both the individual and collective in both the long term and the short term. This will help us get out of our simplistic delusions such as growth is good by forcing us to think about growth and destruction together, combined with what is good and not good. And then we also need to integrate them into the rest of the systems within systems of language. So concepts are not enough. We need to incorporate these into metaphor, syntax, semantics, logic, category structure, which ultimately leads to culture. So the glyphs that I have shown so far are intended to spark a hunger for more. This just shows a joining of all of the ideas that I've presented. If we shifted from a focus from either or to a focus on both and, what cultural shifts would be necessary so that paradoxical language could be used not only in esoteric contexts, but in everyday life? So this image that you've seen throughout this presentation was done by John Dotson. It is called fourth conjunctio. Where, indeed, would a fourth conjunctio take us? Thank you.
Beautiful.